So the observation phase of inductive Bible study concentrates on seeing the text, its details, its language, its structure, its background, its writer, its original audience, all the elements that are visible in the passage itself. And one extremely important part of the process of observation is the formulation of questions that explore the details that we have observed. Good questions actually function as the necessary bridge between observation on one hand and interpretation on the other. The very act of asking questions about what we've seen actually sharpens our vision and helps us to see new things that we might have missed in the first observation. And at the same time, the questions that we ask during observation become the platform for solid interpretive work, the second phase of inductive Bible study. A good question can open up a fruitful line of investigation that leads, in the first place, to a deeper understanding of the message of the passage. And then, in the second place, because of that deeper understanding, a more effective application of the passage in our contemporary context. So, in this particular presentation, I want to highlight 4 aspects of asking good questions during the observation phase. And before we start, before you go on, I would encourage you to open up to Colossians chapter 3, because I'm going to give some examples from Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. So the first thing to remember about questions should be directly and explicitly connected to what you have observed. That's why we're going to use that 2-column format with a different row for each observation. In the first column, write down what you see, describe the detail that you're observing, and then right beside it, in the second column, probe that observation with exploratory questions. If you don't mention a particular detail in the first column, that is, if you don't observe it, then you shouldn't be asking questions about it in the second column. So make sure there's that direct relationship between what you're seeing and describing and the questions that you ask. The second thing to keep in mind, your questions should be expressed in language that keeps you very close to the text itself. Don't import into the passage through your questions language or concepts that aren't present there. Because when you do that, you're interpreting the passage rather than observing it. For example, if you're observing Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, you're probably going to notice the double imperative in those 2 verses. And you might describe that this way. In verse 1, Paul tells them to seek the things above. And in verse 2, he tells them to set their mind on the things above. If you were to ask a question like this, why is Paul describing sanctification this way? You would be interpreting, because Paul does not use the language of sanctification in these verses. Your question assumes that you understand what Paul is doing here. And so you've jumped ahead to interpretation. Instead, use questions that explore what you've seen. Remember, you don't have to answer them right away. You just have to formulate them at this stage of the game. For example, you might ask, what does the phrase things above mean here? And what is the relationship between seeking the things above and setting your mind on the things above? Why does Paul apparently repeat the first imperative in slightly different language? And what's the connection between these first two imperatives and the rest of the imperatives in chapter 3. A third piece of advice about questions: always try to use open questions rather than closed questions. A closed question admits only two possibilities: yes or no, either A or B. And by asking a closed question, you have effectively limited your capacity to see the possibilities you've already interpreted. So let me illustrate once again by using Colossians 3, 1 and 2. A closed question that you might ask about the detail that we've already observed is this: are these two imperatives synonyms? Well, this only allows you to answer yes, they are, or no, they're not. An open question, however, with more interpretive potential would be: what is the relationship between these two imperatives? Seeking the things above and setting your mind on the things above. Another closed question about these two verses and this observation would be: is Paul saying we should keep our attention on heaven? Well, the only answer to that question is yes or no. And by introducing the word heaven, you've also introduced language that's not in the verses. So an open question might be: how does Paul want the Colossians to seek the things above and set their mind on the things above? And what are these things above? And then finally, and this is something that you will probably have to catch yourself on at various points: don't ask first-person questions during observation. I, me, we, us, my church, or Christians in general. Because these first-person questions jump over not just observation, but also jump over interpretation and run straight to application. In the case of Colossians 3, for example, we're not going to ask at this stage of the game, what does Paul want us to do? Because that us carries us straight from the first century horizon to the 21st century horizon. During observation, our questions should focus on the text and the world of the text, the author, the language, the purposes, the intended audience, the structure. So we might want to ask, what effect did Paul want to achieve in the Colossians through the use of this double imperative? As always, if you have questions or observations about this presentation, use the question and answer forum in our course to ask them so that we can have a conversation about it. God bless you.